I'm Steve, better known as 3D Slasher. Okay, so this is going to be a beginner level overview of Philogix PBR Painter Pro. Since May of last year, I've been using this and never looked back. This has really helped fill the gap for having to jump in and out of Blender with Substance Painter. Absolutely worth it. You can go pick it up on the Blender market today. Now let's go ahead and get started. All right, first of all, understand that Philogix PBR Painter Pro is installed through the preferences, through the add-ons, and then you'll come in and click install and find your download. And once you've installed that, you'll see Philogix PBR Painter right here. Now it has a pie menu, which is extremely useful, and you can rotate your HDRI with Alt and right mouse, and that is also very powerful for investigating your models. Now once you've got that started, it's going to be in the end panel, and depending on how you have Blender set up, it might show up as the final install that you have. So if you have 10 add-ons, it'll be the 11th one down towards the bottom. And then when you click on it, you'll get this interface. You'll get a thank you from the author of Philogix, which I work closely with and personally, and I do his main tutorials. And you can also see some documentation, and then you can get some other download links, okay? And that's probably going to take you to some of my earlier tutorials. Now, once you've done that, you'll see a standard window here for a material list. Now you can click here to add materials, but that's not the proper way to do that, and there's a reason for this being here. So with a object selected and in Eevee mode, the very first thing you would do is click New, and you'll get a New Pix Shader option once you click New Pix Shader. Now, depending on your workflow needs, your desires, and what you're used to, you could choose between a metallic or a specular workflow. Now I have a detailed tutorial that's going to walk you through the necessities and the intricacies of the difference between the two. We won't go into that now, and we'll focus only on the metallic workflow, and you'll have a number of different options. I think everybody's pretty familiar with the base color, the metallic, the roughness, the height, and the normal. Now all these things come standard on, and you have the option for an emission, which is a light emitting mesh, subsurface and subsurface color, and you have your alpha channel, which in Philogix PBR Painter Pro is going to be super important. You can just click OK, and the next thing you would do is click on baking. So this is an introduction to Philogix PBR Painter Pro, which is a very powerful and comprehensive texturing tool designed exclusively for Blender. It was somewhat modeled after the Substance Painter, but is definitely an individual program with its own intricacies. You'll have things like size. You can change the recommendation for a slow PC, and these textures are going to look great no matter what you choose. Would be between the 1024 and the 2048. You have a faster PC, you can work with this. Now, there are no limitations due to your operating system. However, for faster bakes, you could stick to 2048, and that would be good enough. Now, since the last upgrade, we now have GPU compute locked in, and now you can use that. And now, before we go any further, I'm just going to monologue for a bit and give you some more intricacies about Philogix. First, Philogix PBR Painter Pro supports the two major workflows that were discussed previously, metallic and specular, accommodating different artistic preferences and requirements. This versatility ensures that you have the freedom to create stunning, realistic materials using workflows that best set your needs. Second, the add-on comes with custom layers that are built in, allowing you to create intricate materials very quickly and efficiently. We'll go over that shortly. Additionally, you can create your own layers and combine them to craft unique, complex textures, providing an unparalleled level of customization. And when I tell you it's unparalleled, that's not just part of the monologue. Your options are just about limitless with the combinations. So it gives you a lot of leeway to really just do things the way you want. And in so doing, you become the creative artist that you really need to be anyway, so you can achieve your goals. Third, Philogix boasts an excellent important import and export function for both custom and standard PBR textures. This means that once you've created something, if you really like it, you can save it and it will internally lock into Philogix and you can recall it at any time. You could even export it and load it to Philogix on another PC and get the same results. And this ensures compatibility with changing between your different PCs, making it an invaluable tool for any artist toolkit. Lastly, Philogix and the PBR Painter workflow excels at baking, and that's what we're going to go over in just a minute. It can bake the normals, it can bake the ambient occlusion, it can bake the height, the alpha, subsurface, metallic, and roughness maps. These are all going to be available to you. You have emissions. This is somewhat of an extra option, but works flawlessly. It's going to generate high quality texture maps for optimal rendering. And just to conclude this short little monologue, Philogix PBR Painter Pro is a remarkable and invaluable addition to the Blender ecosystem. In other words, now for the purposes of making the tutorial not too long, I'm not going to bake on the screen live. What you can do though is just go ahead for your first bake ever. Let's do some settings here that make sense. So you have a margin, you have a quality, your baking device. You have an option that says high mesh, and we'll get into all that, and I actually have some tutorials which already cover these topics. But just to kind of get you going as a beginner, we won't cover all the advanced topics yet. Instead, I want to give you the freedom to go through and check out those things yourself so that you don't feel overwhelmed. Now, I've just got a basic mesh object here in the 3D viewport. Effectively, it's a UV sphere with a couple of creases on it and a couple of loop cuts scaled in. No big deal. You can start by Shift A, putting in any mesh you want. Now, it's important to note that before you get going and bake it, you're going to need to unwrap your model. However, if you use the Suzanne monkey, and just for the workflow's sake, I'm going to go ahead and delete that, and we can go ahead and start with the Suzanne. I'm going to go back and click New Pick Shader for metallic and click OK, and it's going to give me the same screen. Now, you can watch the bake live in the Eevee engine here. If you have fast PC, you can absolutely go to cycles as well. Now, in order for this to look really good, and you don't have to unwrap this as a beginner, so we can skip the unwrap portion, let's go to Add a Modifier, and let's go down to Subdivision Surface and add that modifier. And if I go back to Viewport Shading, you'll see that it kind of tightened up our geometry a little bit. And if you're able with your PC, bring it up to at least 2 levels, and then click Apply for that modifier. Now, really important, we want this to look good, so hit Spacebar, search, type in Shade Smooth, and you can click Shade Smooth. Now this is going to look a heck of a lot better. Now we can go over to UV editing, and the Suzanne's already highlighted, and we can see we've already got an unwrap. So that looks pretty good. We don't need to do anything else with that right now. So let's go back over to the layout and let's get started. So I'm going to pick 2048, which is pretty standard. It's going to look great. Quality, you can literally bring that straight down to 2. It's not going to affect things like you think. And we'll get into why later. So you want to bake your normal, your ambient occlusion, and your curvature. ID, that's going to be a different tutorial, and I do have 3 or 4 different tutorials, and I've actually got a playlist I highly recommend, and I'm going to throw the link in for everybody so you go to the playlist. Now once you've done all that, you simply click Bake, And before you actually do, make sure to go back to the Eevee engine so you can watch it bake out. Now once you've baked that, you'll see a status bar down here at the bottom. Adjust my screen just a little bit. You'll see a status bar down here that's going to give you a percentage on the texture, the ambient, and the curvature. The curvature is usually going to take the longest. And I have two other thoughts before we get fully into the actual bake. One of those would be to make sure that you have in your edit and preferences, and you can go to system and make sure you don't have both of these checked on. For some reason that pops up sometimes that way. It's probably my default startup file and it keeps coming up. So either have the CPU or the GPU on. Don't do both if that's an option. And then for that startup file, you can go to File, go to Defaults. Once that's clicked off, and then you can save this as a startup file. So now Blender will remember that. I just haven't fixed it until now. So I'm going to go ahead and select all these things with the settings we just discussed, and I'll click Bake. And you'll see this will begin to bake now, and the actual mesh color will change. Don't worry, the mesh might actually even disappear during that time. You'll see you're baking the ambient occlusion right now, so you're actually seeing the map, you're not seeing the mesh. And it is actually applying that to the standard UV, which will be automatically selected by Philogix. So a lot of these processes are simply automated. You just don't have to worry about them. I'm going to pause real quick because the curvature takes a little bit while, maybe 45 seconds or so, and then I'll be right back. Alright, so I'm at 96%. Just about done. And you can see there is a little bit of lag there, but it's baking a lot of things to make your life easier. So now you can collapse the bake, and you can click on Paint Layers. And now that we're actually getting into some more advanced things, I have my screencast keys on, so you'll actually be able to see what I'm doing around the screen, okay? So, and if you ever get your 3D cursor out of a line and you want it back at world origin, just hit Shift S, cursor to world origin. And sometimes you gotta do it a couple times because Blender doesn't get the command. Now, two types of layers. You can add a custom or you can add smart materials. We'll go with smart materials first. And if I click this button, it's automatically defaulting to the layer channel. So I don't get confused about all this stuff. We'll just collapse everything that we're not using and just keep it super simple. Custom layer is going to show up as well. Now, I want to go ahead and my first task is going to be to organize. So I'm going to type in base, and I just double click on this like you would over here in the material properties. And for this material, I'm going to double click on it, and I can type in layer 1 and hit enter. Now this is a milestone because you've baked and you took a lot of time. So the one thing you want to do, come over here and make sure you save your file somewhere. I'm just going to save blankly to my D drive, and I'm going to put this as Philogix tutorial, and I'm going to save that blend file. So now that's locked in, and I've got a nice starting point to go back to. And also, if you hit Control S, you'll be able to save that way as well. Now I have machine tools in here, so I get the option to do the save here. And I also have an option, and I'm not going to do a tutorial on it, there are other tutorials, to autosave every minute, every 2 minutes, every 3 minutes. And when I'm doing a big project, I like to save right around every 2 minutes because I've made a lot of progression, especially once you get better at this, you're going to end up making a lot of progression. All right, so now let's understand, we just added a base layer, and now if you see a little circle here, this little property icon, this is the same here as your smart material, so you'll know what you have. And this little stack of papers looks like layers, right? So guess what? You've got layers. That's a layer 1. You have a base channel, which is what we're going to work off of first, because metallic or metalness workflow requires you to have a base color to work from. You have a metallic, and you can just hover the mouse over, and you'll see it says metallic, roughness, height, normal, and then you've got your layers and or custom layers that can be hidden with opacities and all kind of cool things. So let's go ahead now, and if we come down here to this icon, we can now add the surface layer, because all we did was add a basic material. Now let's tell Philogix and Blender what we want it to do. Remember, I'm on the base channel. So now, if I just go ahead and add this, I'm going to get private UVs, UVs. I have the option to go box, flat, sphere, or just use the UVs. And then this is the UV map that's attached to it automatically. If you have other UV maps, they'll pop up here. And that is another tutorial on its own. Then, of course, you have the location, rotation, scale of your material. And you can middle mouse wheel down a little bit. And this little icon here, this is the one you want to click on. And this is going to get you your first materials. Now, what we did, or what I did, is I am on the custom layer. Okay? So this is something you want to be aware of. I've already added the layer to it. So now I have to go back because that was an error, and you're going to make plenty of errors. But by labeling and knowing this and making those mistakes early, you save yourself a lot of headaches later on. So now I can click delete here to delete this layer, and I can click delete here to delete the layers in this info block here. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this one. I'm going to select my base or custom, and now you get a little green icon down here, and these are the inside layers that come with Philogix. Aluminum just happens to be my favorite, and so if you come over here, you'll see that it has put a very nice aluminum texture on our Suzanne. This is fantastic. Now you have a few controls that come with each one of these. Sometimes they'll be different, sometimes not. You could change the roughness to make it less reflective. In other words, it is metal, but what type of metal it's going to be is going to be dependent on the roughness. You can use a bump map. Now you can go anywhere in the this little float value that you want, but if you go all the way to -1, it's going to recess the bump map inside. If you go all the way out, it's going to bring it out. It's not accentuated here, so you're really not going to be able to see that too much. So I'm just going to go 1, keeping that roughness on the outside. Now here's a cool thing. Top thing you want to learn as a beginner is how to get your mesh and your texture to kind of line up in Philogix. Because sometimes you go to zoom in very closely, you'll see little areas that are lines effectively, and I don't see any of that here actually. And I'm trying to find an imperfection somewhere. Okay, so it's not showing up yet, but it will, and when it does, you can remedy the situation. Like you'll see seams and different things. What you can do is go from UV to box, and when you select box, it's going to project box and differently. That's going to give you a value to it kind of overlaps the texture in a manner of speaking without so doing, but you have a blend feature here, and you can see it's going to kind of blend according to a mathematical value of roughness and other things. It's going to kind of blend in, and it will remove seams about 99.9% of the time and make your mesh look outstanding. Now you can come down here live and change this to anything you want, and sometimes it'll take a second to load because it's reading all of the different maps. And so you can change this to bronze, you can change it to bone if you want to make something look more bone-like, and this is pretty shiny, so you may want to work on how that looks. And you can kind of bring the different values up and down, and you'll see in these little corners here, this would be curvature, ambient occlusion, and so on. And you may or may not have those controls here, but you absolutely have an automatic ambient occlusion, an automatic curvature map already put in there. Okay, so now hotkey V. This is where this is going to come in, so you can kind of see what's going on. So if you click on the normals, it's going to give you the normal map, and you'll be able to see that. And it may not mean anything as a beginner, but eventually you'll need to know this. And that way you can investigate it. And now if we go back over here, we'll see that we have a roughness map, and you'll be able to see what that looks like as I change the roughness here. You'll be able to see the roughness map, and that's going to be a very valuable tool as you're tweaking your textures. Then you'll have a height map, and I have no height, and we're not necessarily going to cover height and things like that in this tutorial. It's just going to get you guys flowing, get you going in this. I press V, I go back to the actual material. Now I can do the same thing that I just did there above my first material block where the actual initial layers are, and I can switch between that and pull up the curvature there. And that's about all you get. There's not a whole lot on that particular texture, no problem. And you can hit V and go to subsurface and everything else. So I'll go back to the main material. Let's switch between a couple more, and you can get a good idea of what's going on. I think the peeling paint one will be a good one to go for. And you can see you've already got a very nice texture. This is one of the latest additions, and this is very, very nice. And so you're able to change the bump map, and you can see this is very accentuated here. This actually works kind of like fake height, if you will, and you kind of blend it in or out, however you want to do it. Change the values, the hue, saturation, whatever you want, kind of make it look like it's an old beat up thing. Now what we're going to do, so I'm going to go back to aluminum. We're going to take our custom color layer here. As I do have a base layer, it's going to be the aluminum. That's my base color. Alright, for the sake of simplicity, what we can do is come up here and let's add another smart material. Come down here to the Pix material. Let's add smart rust. Now what happened here is that smart material detected the other layer, and it automatically placed your ambient occlusion, which you can see how that works. Your detail is customizable, and you can kind of see how that works. It almost seems like a Musgrave texture, but it's a bit more powerful than that. And you can bring the finite detail up considerably. And just that I can zoom in that far, that close with the detail is insane. And it doesn't crash Blender. So this is not a Musgrave texture. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to leave the custom layer alone for now. Let's add in another smart material layer. And I want to be on the base channel. I'm going to come down and add that new material. And you can pick anything you want. Just pick something that's a smart material with a little icon next to it. I'm going to go with the smart rust. And what that's going to do is throw in the default rust according to how you had baked everything. So you can see in those curvature areas, the ambient occlusion areas, you've got control over how that rust and that oxidized metal looks. You can bring the detail up, which is important. You can mess around with the surface grain, kind of spread it out. So you've got some detail functions here. Like I say, you could change the bump map forward or backward, or rather inside or out, or somewhere in between. It's not too important. And you have all of those controls available. Now, what if you want to actually paint this on or take it off? In other words, you can paint the rust on, or you can take the rust off of the base layer, thus covering and or revealing. So I'll show you one of those processes right now. So with this material, and I'm actually going to take the custom layer just for now. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. We don't need it. And I'm going to take material 2, double click it, call it rust. I'm going to come over to the layer channel, go ahead and click on that. And now what we want to do is make this a paint layer. Now remember, you have your surface layer option. Right next to that is going to be paint. So go ahead and click on paint, and you can middle mouse wheel down a little bit. You can click new. You can switch this to 2048. You just type it in manually, or you can left click it, hit the right arrow, hit Shift 8. That gets you an asterisk, and you can press 2 if it says 1024. If I hit enter now, I get 4096. I'm just going to Control Z back because I don't want that. And apparently Control Z does not work on that, so I'm just going to type in 2048. Now, make sure that when you click on color, everything's at 0 except for your alpha. Bring your alpha all the way up if it's not, and then click OK. Now what that did is that kind of disappeared the rust. It's not visible yet because we haven't told Blender to reveal it and or paint or the opposite, whatever your goal is. So now with that in mind, I want to go ahead and click paint, and you could choose any brush you want. They're pretty self-explanatory. They have a little icon to show you what it's going to look like. The one that paints on the best is going to be the rough round right here, so you can get that one ready. So now what I want to do is I want to come over to texture paint, and your background of the UV map is going to be important. If it's not white, click on the white, click on the paint bucket, and then left click on the map. Just to show you what it does, I'll click on the black paint bucket, and see, I may have to press V to get that to work. It's not going to try to do it. I'll just go straight black here, paint bucket, and then paint that black. Now that's going to change how it's layered. So we don't want to do that. We want to make sure the slider is all the way up to the top on pure white, and that's what the result is going to be. So now if you come back over here, let's try a couple things out. If you go from mix, which is the standard mix node in Blender, we can go down and try multiply and see what that looks like. Now that actually didn't show that it did anything. Now if you start painting, you click paint here and begin to paint in, you're not really going to get the results that you want. You can begin to start painting in kind of like the original, what was there. I'm just going to Control Z back a little bit. Now what I actually want to do is I'll stay on mix for this one. And now F controls your brush size, very important. Controls the area of the paint. The strength, important. If it's way down here, you're not going to notice good results. You can go ahead and bring it up to wherever you wish. Make sure you're on the full color of pure white, and then you can begin to kind of paint this in. And what you'll see is it's kind of calculating the rust and everything else. And let me just Control Z back a little bit, bring the brush size down. Now you can paint in orthographic view if you wish, and kind of get in there and make it look a little bit more accurate, or you can get a big swath area. Now it's also important to note that when you're painting orthographically, you can't necessarily see what you're doing, so you want to kind of be cautioned with that. You can just left click tap a little bit and offer up some different spots and a little different design. Know that the fall off here, you can see how that really doesn't look good, so you may want to change your fall off a little bit. And you can find the fall off in a few places. This is one of them, and I can just select something like one of the preset brush shapes, just kind of an open brush if you will, and then kind of go and begin to paint in, and just kind of left click, place some of this. Now it's gonna place it according to the settings on the original texture that we have, and I'll show you what I mean in just a second here. Get some of this on here good and strong. Don't forget, you do have to click finish, and if you see there's a little asterisk here, it literally says unsaved. So if you were to come over here to the image, you'll actually have to save that image. Now that's saved in Blender, it's kind of still temporary, and it actually packs that file for you. And so it's all temporary until you do that. And so now I would click finish. And if you keep that procedural workflow going like that, you won't make mistakes and lose your stuff. Now, let's go back to the original rust and base channel with our smart material, and I'll zoom in so you can kind of see what's going on. So now if I come here to the AO, I can still have some control over that, plus the surface grain and the detail just a little bit, and that may give you the extra that you need to really make this look good. You can also change the colors of this to anything you want. And of course that's very, very basic, very crash course, and that would get you kind of started with your base layer and your first actual custom layer that you can paint on. And the sky's the limit because you can kind of do whatever you want. Now if I come back over to the layer channel where this is, I can click paint again, go and choose a different brush like cracks, turn the strength maybe all the way up, hit F, and I can now add in some cracks and give it some give the look some vitality, some realism, kind of look like veins. It's pretty cool. I press 7 and take a top view and kind of add in, let's see, what did I do there? I think I got that other brush selected. Let's try that again. There we go. And I'll bring the brush down a little bit because I don't really want to overlap too much. And that looks pretty cool. And now you've got some more realism added to your model, and you can do it that way. And so that would actually save you some time trying to sculpt that in, because you can just do that. Certain workflows are designed to save you a bunch of time, and you can add smaller versions of that. Don't be afraid to kind of crowd that in. You can do whatever you want. Make sure to click finished, click save, and click finish, and just keep that in mind. And then it's not necessarily saved, so go ahead and save it here too. And every time you've got a milestone, save it, and you will not have so many headaches. Now I can actually go back over to the base channel. I'll go to the base channel and the base layer, and I can change the color of this to anything I want. So you can just change this around. If you want it to be a little bit more golden, you can do that. If you like that light blue hue, which aluminum takes on kind of a light blue sometimes after a while, and so that would look pretty neat. And then of course your other layers like the rust, you can completely change that as well and make it look almost like mold. It's actually very high detail. It looks really nice. Like I said, you still got the controls here. If you switch this bump, you'll see now what it's doing is it's going in, and if I go out, it's accentuated out. It's a negative bump. And so if you come into the shading tab, and let's see if it's going to allow me to do what I want. Okay, so we've got all these Philogix nodes in here, so I don't want to disrupt that. What's cool though is this is just kind of standalone. It's just kind of Blender has to put something in there. And what I want to do is, if I can get this thing, it's lagging very bad. So down here you've got your bump map. If you hit Shift A and search and just type in bump, you can get the bump map. This has an invert in it, so if I was to plug this in and invert, then that is going to be the exact same thing, and the distance maybe a little bit more. You could put noise to it. You can plug in noise to the height. You could type in noise, get a noise texture factor, plug that in, and do some really cool stuff. I'm not going to go that route because of course I've got Philogix. I do not need that because it's going to have that locked in, but just in case you did not know. And then you can kind of get a variance, whatever you think looks good, and you can do that. And that's kind of some very realistic, maybe somewhat fake height, but it definitely works. The bump works out nice. I'm going to leave mine looking more like veins for Suzanne. Now let's say I want to add something else to this, just a basic color. I come down here to the custom color on the base channel. I'll bring this down, and I want to bring something in that is just stark blue. All right, That's good. I'll come over to the layer. We're going to do the same thing. I'm going to add that as a paint layer. Give it just a second to catch up. Now I can click New, leave it to black, 2048, hit OK. And voila, we're back in business. So now we can go ahead and paint this in. And if I want blue cracks or something completely different, I can paint that in. If I want to put a screw on here, I can do that. And this is a little bit more advanced. Actually, I'll skip that for right now. Let's put a seam in. This is cool. You can paint seams in, and this is better done orthographically, if you will. And the smaller you make this, the more it's going to look like potentially a zipper. And now you can see what just happened there. That actually looks pretty cool. I'll click Save, Finish. Gonna save it. And now I'm actually going to take this material. I'm just going to call this my zipper. It's not truly a zipper, but it looks like one sort of. And I'll take this one and I want to anchor this layer. Now it's an anchor, which is this layer right here. And this will be the final thing in the beginner. This is just to kind of get your feet wet in this. And it's really cool. I can now come to the height channel, which we baked. It's not associated with anything. And now if I click anchor, I drop an anchor layer onto the height channel. Okay. And you'll see what happened here is it assigned it something kind of funky here. But let's go down to the anchor. And now I can grab the zipper layer mask. And once I've done that, I'll now have control over this on the height channel. And it's now height information being displayed. And I can change that, how that ends up looking. I wouldn't say this is tremendous. I think the blue is throwing it off. So go back to base. I'll bring the hue to 0, saturation to 0, which will make it white. And it's kind of showing that blue and everything else underneath it. And then I'll go back over to the height channel. And now opacities are really cool, because I can change how that actually shows up in the intensity. Alright guys, that is it. That is a beginner crash course on adding some very nice, very fine and finite details to any mesh. And if you don't use the Suzanne, very simply grab your mesh. You can go into edit mode, hit A for all, press U, click Smart UV Project, go to your island margin and just give it some kind of a value. It doesn't have to be much, something like that. And you might give it a little area weight if you want as well, and then click OK. But do that before you bake if you do a different type of mesh. And of course, keeping geometry in mind, you want something like this that's going to have more quads available, and so everything looks good. Also, to note, always paint with the UV layer. So on the rust and the layer channel, we left the UVs where they are. Now we'll go over to the base channel and the base color. We're box projecting. Okay, so that's okay to do. You can box project on your base layer, but you want to paint UVs so it ends up in the right spot. Otherwise, you're going to have paint here, and then it's going to show up over here. If you paint here, it's going to show up over here. So you want to have a good unwrap and have a good time when you're doing this, and don't be frustrated. Hit me up in the comments below. Smash that subscribe, smash that like. It's very important, keeps the channel going. And yes, Philogix does sponsor me. If you do not have that, Philogix, go pick it up. I've got a massive playlist that is chock full of things, and I will answer any questions you have to the absolute best of my ability. And of course, like I said, I collab with the creator, so if there's something by chance that I cannot answer, I guarantee you I will get the answer to you on that, and within short order, because I watch my channel and do tutorials every couple of days. I've got a short or a tutorial or something on my community page. I've got the Discord now, so when you buy Hard Surface Toolbox, which is something I tout, I made this myself. This is my add-on. It comes with a bunch of really cool hard surface models that you normally, are kind of difficult to make. And I'm just append this in right about there. And so some of these are actually pretty difficult to make, especially with good geo. So gives you a nice starting point. And say, if you pick up like a nice top view, you grab this carver tool, which is static hard surface modeling right in Blender. Press the space bar twice, I get circle. I press X a couple times, and I can bring that up. And then cut in some very nice, very clean booleans into the mesh. And like I said, that's it. I really appreciate everybody watching, and I'm trying to create a community of Blender users. I love focusing on beginner and intermediate because I know the struggle. I know how hard it is to get things right. Use me as a resource. I'm happy to answer any questions I'm able. Nobody knows absolutely everything about Blender, but I have an add-on that literally consolidates every single major feature between the object and the edit mode that you're going to need to really get started. Shift-Alt-Q on my add-on will bring up a edge modeling tool with X-ray, so you can grab your mesh and see through it and kind of check out the geo as you go. There's a lot to be done. So, and let me go ahead and bring that back. And I just hit Control-Alt-Q, which actually takes you into the quad view. So that's pretty cool. And that's it. See you guys in the next tutorial lesson. Go pick up Philogix. The detail on this thing is incredible. And we only use 2048. We didn't even go to 4K. See ya.